Welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at correlated subqueries, a specific type of subquery that uses both outside and inside information. Let's go ahead and take a look. So correlated subqueries are really easy to identify. You can automatically see them because when you're looking at the clause that we use to identify how to take information from the inner query and put it inside the outer query, there's going to be a relationship between the outer table and the inner table specified usually in the where clause where we identify that. And so we use the table alias or the table name to talk about that. Oh, the outer table name is matching against the inner table name inside that correlated subquery. This is yet another great reason to have good naming conventions, because when you have naming conventions, you can easily identify, oh, this is clear to the inner table and that is clear to the outer table when you're talking about writing those query conventions. This is the most common subquery you would see in a select clause because it generates a value once per execution of the outer row. And so since the select clause executes for every row, it's like, oh, I want to put this in here. And so I add that value to there if and only if it matches that actual value. And also when we're talking about that, when we're working with this inside a select clause, your correlated subquery must be a scalar subquery because it can only insert one value into that at a time. So just as an FYI, you have to make sure you grab those values and only put them in one at a time for that. Here we have an example working with correlated subquery in our select clause. And so I'm going to generate a number appropriate count per course. And so I select section.section ID, section.course number, and then I have my subquery right there. And I have select count star as enrolled from enrollment ENR, where section ID is equal to ENR.section ID as num enrolled. And so you can see right here, I clearly have the outer table reference with the SEC.section ID and the inner table reference with ENR.section ID. So I can have those match one-to-one on that from section SEC where the section ID is less than 110. So I'm able to do an example of a correlated subquery using the select clause right here, so I can generate the value once per row as I go through and execute that. I can also see this inside a where clause, and so you can see right here I have select count star as times enrolled from enroll ENR, where student ID is equal to ENR.student ID, and so I'm working with the student table on the outside, and I'm correlating that with the enrollment table on the inside of that subquery. So for every time I hit a student, I check to see if they are enrolled, and I add them to that, add the count of that times enrolled if they actually do exist inside that. So we can have that happen for the ones that are more than 3 classes. We can also work with this using the exists and not exist keywords. And this is the kind of subquery we check to see if there's a matching row in the inner query based on the key or keys we supply across the queries themselves. So the select clause of the inner query only has a string literal though for what it's selected from, and that's usually just going to be an X. And the where clause determines if the row exists or not based on that relationship we just specified above between the outer table and the inner query. So let's go ahead and take a look at that right here. So in an exist sample, I have select stu.firstname, stu.lastname from student stu. So I'm working with the student table. And then where not exists, and this is where my subquery comes into play. And again, it's a correlated subquery. And I'm selecting X, the string literal, from enrollment ENR, where the enrollment student ID matches the student's student ID. And so I'm checking to see all the students who aren't enrolled because I'm using that not exist. And so if they don't have a reference inside the ENR.student ID and student ID, then I'll be able to extract that information from it because I'm checking to see if it doesn't exist inside that. And so I'm using the correlated student ID I'm using the correlated subquery combined with a not exist clause using that string literal selection to determine whether I'm going to add that student to the row or not. And so I'm grabbing that, using that to actually restrict the results to use a correlated subquery to get some more information with that. Now again, you can easily identify those by identifying the outer table, the inner table, and you can get some really good information by using this, working within the select clause, the where clause, and just using this exists and not exist structure. I hope this is helpful. Cheers, we'll see you next time, and have a good day. Bye-bye.